Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to episode 2 of Paddock to Planet, our White Griffin series on all things horse and environmental. Today, we're talking about avoiding toxins in your horse's life, and we're joined by 3 expert panelists who all are innovators, creators in their field, and have found ways to remove some of the toxins that are prevalent in our horse's world. And it's a part of environmental sustainability that maybe isn't talked about very much. We hear a lot about climate change or water shortages, but pollution is very much a part of environmental sustainability and gets right to the heart of the relationship between welfare and the environment, which we have always maintained is a very important parallel or Venn diagram. So today, Alex Carr from Noviun, Zoe Kiff from Honest Riders, and Ben Tuckey from BioGenie, who is now I think found a room with
I've
good internet
relocated.
connection. Had a little tour of the house there. That's fine. It's good to keep some informality. Are all going to be talking with me for the next hour. And this recording will be made available on our website. We'll provide links on social media after the webinar is concluded. So I'm going to kick off with question number 1, right where I started in the introduction, which is the relationship between welfare and the environment. And Ben, I maybe want to come to you first. We'll check out your internet connection and volume
I'm
controls.
confident. I'm confident now.
Um, because your product is very much the immediate environment that a horse is in. So would it be safe to say that you have come at it from a welfare angle, or did you start with sustainability? Tell us a bit about Genie.
We very much came at it from a horse welfare, certainly initially a horse welfare angle. And what we do is provide 360-degree biosecurity provision for the equine or equids as a whole, regardless of what they're doing, whether it's race horses or dressage horses or whatever it may be. And biosecurity, in essence, is dealing with equine environmental health. So biosecurity, by definition, is the control, a set of practical measures that we put in place to combat harmful microorganisms. In so doing, the harmfulness of these microorganisms are matched by the harmfulness of certain products that are used to combat them. So it was after extensive research and looking at the status quo, what is being used to keep our environment healthy in terms of dealing with horse welfare, the welfare of the environment was compromised. So what we did is come up with a solution, which is, we'll come to it later, a solution that is used elsewhere out of the equine environment using a new technology. So we have increased efficacy to combat these microorganisms with zero knock-on effect to the environment. So zero toxins and zero byproducts.
And Zoe, to you for one moment then, Honest Riders. This is very much about a product that you would apply directly to the horse. So again, did you come at it from a welfare point of view?
No, we were similar to Ben. Actually, we started with the environment. I was really shocked at the amount of single-use plastic, harsh chemicals, and non-biodegradable products in the equestrian world. I've got horses myself, and I really wanted to prove that we could do better. I was interested in sustainability. I was interested in the impact that chemicals have on our skin. But actually, it was more about sustainability for our horses and the planet. So, Honest Riders began with eco-friendly grooming and care products packaged in refillable or recyclable formats. We've also got some zero waste products. But what's been amazing is that by removing things like harsh sulfates and silicons and sensitizing preservatives, the products have actually turned out to be better for welfare too, because they're kinder on the horse's skin, safer on our hands, and far less harmful when they inevitably end up in our soil and our water.
And we'll come on to this in a moment after we've spoken with Alex, but it's amusing to me that we should be surprised that a product that is better for the environment would also be better for the horse. We've lived for a very long time with toxins in our world. In fact, probably each of us on the call have only ever lived with toxins in our environment. And Alex, if I come to you at this point, you're at a slightly different point in the horses world than perhaps Ben and Zoe, have that very direct
Mhm.
relationship because your product is actually about arena surfaces.
That's right. So Novian surface is a more sustainable natural surface option than traditional synthetic fiber or wax additives. And when we started developing, we did come at it from a welfare perspective initially because we were seeing injury rates and issues with existing surfaces that we really wanted to fix and to make sure that there is a safer alternative for performance athletes, both rider and horse. And then as we started developing it, the amount of research done on the carpet fibers and the synthetic fibers and the polymers and the petrochemical waxes, it was jarring how much residual effects that the materials shed into the environment. And so there was an immediate focus then on it doesn't just have to be a welfare concern, it also has to be an environmental concern. And so that was our development process. So we initially came at it from a wellness perspective, but then moved into a twofold situation because it was, they go hand in hand.
And you've been establishing your surface out in America for 10 years now.
That's correct.
And it's interesting to me, and again, reflecting on what you were saying there, Zoe, we have a reasonably good understanding of toxins in our human life, and we're starting to reject those more and more. Do you think people are considering toxins around horses? Perhaps start with Zoe there. Is that something that you felt quite on your own in your journey, or do you think people are starting to think about that more?
I think you're right. I think people are more and more aware in the sort of skincare, cleaning product and cosmetic world, but perhaps haven't translated that into horse care products. And horse care products use a lot of the same ingredients. The other thing is that we read headlines about parabens, MIs, MCIs, formaldehyde, but when it comes to horse products, there's a common perception that if it's sold in a tack shop, it must be safe. And there's very little regulation in the horse world versus what there is in the cosmetic and the skincare world, where, ingredients and end products are highly regulated. And in reality, many horse shampoo sprays, hoof products still contain some of the very old school chemicals that are being phased out of human cosmetics. And I think what we need to do is be a lot more transparent as an industry about what the ingredients are in our horse care products. There's no regulation that says that you have to display those ingredients on horse care labels, unlike in the cosmetic and skincare world. And I think there just needs to be a lot more transparency and help for horse owners to understand exactly what is in those products and what the potential risks around it are.
So how the people that are listening on our call and that will be watching afterwards, I don't know what I would be looking for. How would somebody know if it's not regulated and you don't have like a terrifying symbol of sort of like a skull and crossbones on the back? How would you know that the product you're buying from your trusty friendly tack shop it is bad for your horse?
You'd struggle because, like I say, a lot of them don't list ingredients, and we as an organisation have done a great deal of competitor research and kind of ingredients research as well. But we're one of the few brands that actually lists all of our ingredients on our website and on the label. And I just don't think the transparency is there. I think there's a bit of a fear speaking to some other kind of horse care brand owners, some of which we stock on our website, and we do all the due diligence around what ingredients are in those products. There's a fear that they're going to be copied, I think. A lot of these horse care brands are quite small and they just don't want to be, yeah, ripped off and copied. Maybe that's one of the motivations, but it's really difficult as a horse owner. You just don't know unless you email them directly and say what is in this product. And then obviously you've got to take those ingredients and translate them and also understand percentages and what percentage could have an impact on your skin, your horse's skin. It's really difficult. It's a minefield, in fact.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The fact is, in on a lot of the labeling, which is why you then have a safety data sheet, which no one looks at. A lot of the labeling, you're only required by law to put some of the actives in. And of course, that doesn't cover the full scope of the nasties that are there. And quite, there are long words. So benzalkonium chloride, for example, is a substance which is present if you look under your sink at home and pull out a flash spray or something similar. Benzalkonium chloride will be on there for sure. It's part of the quat family. And during COVID, the use of cleaning products, as you mentioned, Zoe, and disinfectants for more clinically during COVID, the uses of those obviously in that period went up like 8,000%, and with that, so did the ill health of people's pets, because what started happening is dogs and cats started coming into contact with these active ingredients, and what the dogs and cats do, they groom themselves. So they then ingest these harmful ingredients, loss of appetite, internal bleeding, respiratory disorders. They get taken to the vets, and we as humans think, oh, using the disinfectants around our household, we're contributing to the health of the environment. But there's a cost to that. And the cost is, all of the above. Transpose that to horses, which is the subject matter, exactly the same ingredients are used in all the popular products that are consumed around the horses. Then, you're not asking your dog to run around Ascot at 100 miles an hour. These horses are then going to perform. They need optimal respiratory health, and it's being compromised by the products that are being used around them. And we know nothing about it.
That's extraordinary, isn't it? And I think it speaks to almost how did we get to this point? And I don't know if you have a perspective on that before I move on to Alex and the regulation in her space. But how on earth did we get to the point where we all, I went through a spate of creating my own homemade cleaning materials, and and my husband complained that the house smelled like a fish and chip shop. So I must confess that I then moved back across to a more natural product, but I suspect it's probably not that natural. So just from a psychological point of view, how do you think we get to a point where we accept the fact that we're liberally spraying our horses' stables with toxins, or indeed, in Zoe's case, not obviously your product, but your products, competitors, actually directly applying it to the horse? How did we get to that mentality, do you think? Slightly off topic, but I'm just curious your perspective.
I think it's availability and laziness. All these things are made in one place. You go into a supermarket. You walk down the aisle of the cleaning section. You have like cleaning products for bathrooms, for kitchens, for a different one for a sink, different one. They're all the same. They're all the same. Yeah. They're all made in the same factories. So they just stick a label with a picture of a horse on it and distribute it out for. And I know this happens. So it's availability, cost, and laziness, frankly.
I was going to say that. I was going to say money.
Yeah, it always comes down to
these ingredients are cheaper. They're a lot cheaper. They're easier to mass produce. So I guess for the big brands, why wouldn't they use them? Because their margins are hugely inflated versus if they were to use something that was more considered and better for us and the environment.
And on that topic, sorry, Ben.
Yeah, and they might add over time. One of the issues with the efficacy of these things, over time, if you're using the same active ingredient over time, microorganisms become resistant to them, particularly in the case of benzalkonium chloride, for example, which is useless in combating very common bacteria called Pseudomonas. We know this because of veterinary testing that we see firsthand. So they start to add different ingredients aside from the active to make it more efficacious, like alcohol and polyhexamethylene and things like that. And you don't have to declare them on the labeling because they're not the prime active. So there's all these, it gets worse. There's all these hidden ingredients, behind the scenes.
I mean, that's just terrifying, isn't it? To think that we've got that level of toxin directly around us in our stables. Because of course, whilst the horse is our primary concern, we've got either ourselves or our grooms in and around the stables and interacting with this as well. This isn't just about horse respiratory or skin problems. This is actually about rider
100%.
respiratory. And
Yeah.
this really is where, Alex, your side of things has had a little bit of a leg up, because there was a recognition a few years ago that the toxins from carpet fibers were extremely dangerous. And actually, for once, we've had a little bit of regulation around that. But to Zoe's point, I think we were using carpet fibers in footings or, gallops, arena surfaces, etc., because it was seen as inexpensive and a good use of a waste material. But actually, Alex, you've read into a lot of research on the toxins that were involved in carpet fibers.
Absolutely. So the UK is the only country actually in the world that has put some sort of limitation on carpet fibers, which was a huge leg up in our service industry, which is it brought a lot more attention to what the concerns are with carpet fiber. And it really helped open the conversation in the surface world of what's actually going into the ground right now. And since then, there's been a lot of rhetoric change, a lot of questions on synthetic fiber in general. So the EU now has a total ban entirely on any sale of synthetic fiber for sport uses after 2030, with a full stop in deadline by 2031. And so that is within, it's close. It's not, 10 plus years away now. We're talking within really close range of people installing arenas this year are going to need some sort of top up or resurfacing or something by the time that ban's in place. And so that's really changed a lot of conversation in Europe, which has been a really fun way for us to get more involved in just talking about toxins, inhalation issues, respiratory concerns with performance horses. And America will always follow Europe. Europe's usually a little bit more ahead of just in general in terms of equestrianism than in America. And so, but I do get regular questions here about what is it? What's the difference between a synthetic fiber and a natural fiber, and why is the synthetic bad? And for the first time, I think more people are definitely questioning what's in their surfaces, which has been a really nice change than when we first started, because when we first started, there was no conversation happening and we were more woo-woo than anything else. So I do think we're seeing a positive trend, which is really, hopeful on our end, not just because of our product, just the industry in general. I think is going to be more accepting, hopefully, of once they see the efficacy of these more natural surface options. And to speak to how we got here, in terms of surfaces, so it was much more different about 20 years ago, before the consistent horse showing world started. So before, you had more of a cyclical show. So you'd show, you'd go home, you'd spend months at home, you go to your next show. And so the need for year-round surfaces wasn't as necessary. But because of the increase in showing and the more strain that we're putting on our athletes, both human and rider, or rider and horse, of the consistent amount of showing out there, you needed more consistent surface year round, which is why you start getting your all-weather arenas. And in order to make a more stable surface, it worked option was a synthetic fiber to create a year-round synthetic stable surface to ride on. And so that's kind of how we started, and it was cheap. It was very cheap. And so they were able to inundate the market because it was a byproduct of a roofing or a carpet product. And so to Zoe's point is, money makes a big difference. And so getting out of that mentality a little bit, whether it's natural or not it's gonna be a little bit more of a fight, I think, but we're getting there.
Thank you for explaining that because I must say I do find that for whatever reason, arena surfaces seem harder for people to wrap their head around why it would be toxic.
Mhm.
And ironically, it's the same when we're talking about water. When we talk about water shortages or saving water, people will often think about overflowing buckets. Oh, we my groom always leaves the tap running and whatever. But when I say yes, but what about the volume of water going into the arena surface? It's almost like a forgotten habitat in a weird sort of way.
Mhm.
And yet, the amount of time that your horse is spending in the arena, moving, kicking up that surface, or indeed when it comes to horse racing, down those paddocks, and the horse's face is or nose
Fair.
at least is very much closer to that ground. So just Ben and Zoe gave us a lot of names of chemicals and things that I'm hoping that everyone watching will be furiously noting down and will be Googling and trying to understand. But just shed a little bit more light on the specifics of that because I think that people don't quite understand. I have carpet in my house.
Mhm.
Why can I not have carpet fiber or synthetic fibers in my arena? Why is that toxic?
So there's different materials within the carpet specifically that add to coatings or fire retardants that are heavily dangerous and carcinogenics. So those are what's being shed. And when you cut those fibers into small sizes, you're breaking the integrity and you're opening up more for that fire retardant or those preservatives basically to keep the longevity of that synthetic fiber. You're breaking down the integrity of those molecules essentially. And so as it breaks down, it sheds further into the environment around itself. So similar to athletic clothes that have PET or different types of waterproof options that you have out there in clothing, when you wash them, it breaks down the connectivity essentially, and it sheds more into the surrounding atmosphere. And so when you have materials that are in a surface and you have consistent movement, a horse landing on a surface, the it is a very strong tension essentially as they land, right? And so you're going to consistently be breaking down both the sand and the additive over time, more so than if you were just to leave it and to let it break down naturally by itself in the ground. And so you're having a more consistent breakdown of those molecules, and as they shed and it rains, it gets watered, those materials, PFAS and PFOs are a huge conversation, and those are in all recycled synthetic fibers, all recycled carpet fibers, virgin or recycled, it doesn't really matter. In fact, a lot of times recycled is worse because it sheds at a greater rate than a virgin plastic. And so the concept of using a recycled fiber, it's there. I understand the need to not want to make more because then you're contributing to, higher waste. But it does shed at a greater volume, and so you're getting more microplastic contamination and breakdown of chemicals in your surrounding water or sand than you would if you were to use a virgin. And so over time, it breaks down to a point where it becomes a respiratory problem because you're breaking down into such a molecule size that as it puffs up into the rider or the horse, you're now inhaling just loads of microplastic and chemicals versus just straight sand.
And actually, and that's very much the connective point that we're talking about today, isn't it? That you have got that very, very clear welfare issue that all three of you are identifying in the stable with horse products and outside in, or indeed indoor or outside in the arena space. So that horse welfare issue to do with skin, respiration, or even impact, as you're saying, Alice, is really clear. But from our point of view, in terms of the environment, in all three cases, what we're ultimately talking about is it's making contact with the horse, potentially, probably also the rider, but then it's either being washed away or it's being disposed of directly into the environment. So Ben, in your case, I've been trying to gen up a little bit on what your team do when they're on site. But presumably, if people weren't using your product, they were using these harsh chemicals. What we're talking about essentially is that being washed out into the water system, but also into any grassy area that's in an immediate proximity.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's I've been writing down. There's a couple of things going on it. So air, surface, and water, is 360-degree environmental health is what we're concerned about. Water's been mentioned 2 or 3 times. So just coming to that on a water on a bed. First of all, runoff. I mean, we get a lot of veterinary hospitals that come to us say, that the runoff goes into natural drainage, and in some cases sort of facilities that recycle certain, like sewage and things like that. And these veterinary hospitals get under a lot of pressure to reduce their chemical runoff. And that's where we come in. We have a product that is organic compliant. So, for organic processes, including horticulture. So that it degrades the water and oxygen. So there is no runoff. Traveling, and what, Alex is saying, when you take a horse, you're competing and you arrive at, you have the issues around the arena surfaces. It doesn't end there. So the water quality varies a huge amount in different geographical locations. And horses, when they travel, they become immunocompromised. So when you from the UK to the Sunshine Tour to Valencia, you travel for 3 days, then you arrive there. And what's the first thing you do? You give your horse water because it's dehydrated. So there are lots of instances, and you mentioned skin ingestion. So the horses get washed down and they come out in lumps, and everyone thinks, oh, there's bacteria in the water because we're washing the horse down with it. It's actually yes, bacteria is in the water, but the horse consumes the water, and it shows in lumps coming out in their skin. So then what happens? Water is treated with, guess what? Chlorine, which is hundreds of years old. Chlorine doesn't smell. When you smell and you think, oh, that smells of chlorine, it's not chlorine, that's it gassing off. So we have this loop of, inefficiency after inefficiency, where, water, to your point earlier, is treated to make it more consumable with a chemical which is outdated and harsh. And I can give you, and this is the same. This is the case in the human environment as well. There's in Ottawa, in Canada, a few years ago, and this is in black and white. It's beyond any reasonable doubt. There were cases in a municipality in Canada where cases of bowel cancer were on the rise steadily. And what they did in the water processing plant, they dropped the use of chlorine. In replacement of that, they used actually product that I use for equine. And over the next 3 years, the cases of bowel cancer just depleted. So, and we are consuming, it's fine now and again, but we're drinking water treated with chlorine every single day. And if you knew the facts, you'd get it. You'd get it sorted straight away.
It's interesting to hear you talk because my colleague Zoe, a different Zoe, and I went to a talk at FarmEd, which is it's a fantastic facility in sort of on the Gloucestershire-Oxfordshire border. And this talk was about eliminating or how to live a healthy life in toxic times, basically. And she was talking about the water system and the use of fluoride and the connections that are very, very, very well stated in many, many medical journals. That these toxins, when they're in our water, but as you say, in our air, largely to do with petrochemicals, they're in our food, they're in our products, that we're ingesting these toxins on a semi-permanent basis. And it is having a direct impact on our health. And again, any number of papers from the medical industry are identifying that. But I wonder whether we do have that same level of research for equines. And it's an open question. Perhaps there is, perhaps there's a body of work that I'm not familiar with, but do we have the equivalent of the doctor that spoke with us, who's released many books? Do we have that equivalent of how to have a horse in toxic times and the impact? We don't. Okay.
No, absolutely not. And everyone, we get, when we present something to a customer, whoever that might be, oh, let me speak to my vet.
Hmm.
And we deal with the top vets in the country. And I sat down with one of them and I said, okay, let's get it straight. Um, David, there is nothing in the veterinary curriculum. There is in Germany, but in the UK about toxic substances, well, in our case, in biocidal products, which are used every day. So when the end user, their only contact is their vet.
Mm.
The vets, they don't know. They don't know the ingredients in a product that they're recommending or they're selling even from the vets. So it's an educational thing that is pervasive, not just to the end user, but which is partly why we've become specialists in an area and our momentum has got, because no one else is doing it. No one else is raising that flag, saying, "Look, you need to be more vigilant, and these are the reasons why, and the reasons why need to be documented." So people won't take it seriously unless they're presented with black and white, before and after answers to this is why you shouldn't be using the product, and actually, or switching, from product A to product B, and these are the reasons why. People are scared of change, and something they've been doing forever doesn't mean it's still okay to do now. People were smoking on the back of aeroplanes
Yeah.
in 1986. Doesn't make it, that doesn't make it right today.
And would you go to that point? Would you say that the toxins that you're talking about are equivalent to smoking and those kind of health crises?
I know they are. We have, I mean, there's such a thing as fogging or spraying. So it's a process of disinfection that is used at race courses, at race yards, at veterinary hospitals all over the country. And what is happening is, if a horse next door to a stable that is being fogged with a product that has benzalkonium chloride in it, for example, or quaternary ammonium compound, which they are, they started bleeding. So it's very difficult to assess that until the horse is going through, is exerting itself. Then it bleeds. Once it's done that, it's very difficult. You then have a potentially permanent problem for that horse. And the users, or people that are doing the fogging, also complain of respiratory disorder. We know this is true. We know this is actually happening, but it's aerosolized. And the issue that I mentioned with the pets during COVID, I mean, it's real, but it's not documented.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting because the welfare side of the sustainability hasn't really been talked about until very recently. And there's certain concepts that the media does hold on to, such as if it's affecting an endangered species or if it's affecting kids' ability, like kids' cancer. So, for example, there's a sport infill that the rubber, which is used in equestrian surfaces, will cause cancer for kids over time. A lot of ovarian cancer specifically. But the things that are addressed oftentimes don't make it directly then immediately to the horse health. So like pyrethrins are a really topic of concern here in America because it's you address, the rodents in the barn, and then a hawk comes down and kills the rodent, and then the hawk dies, and the hawks are endangered and they're protected. And so you have organizations that are trying to protect those hawks. So then they come after the equestrians that are using those materials and those chemicals, which that's great that we're bringing attention to dangerous chemicals, but there almost has to be, there's not still a
It's the
connection.
hawk, not the horse.
It's the hawk, not the horse. And
Mhm.
there's a disconnect that for some reason it's not getting through that I'm so glad that hawks are being concerned, point of concern. But your everyday use of these materials for your horse and your riders and your grooms need to also have the same level of concern.
And I can't help but
Yeah.
wonder whether this is your absolute classic cause and effect issue. And Zoe, I suspect this will crop up a lot in your line of work with, particularly around skincare. If the product that you put on your face as a human being instantly brought you out in a rash, you wouldn't use it. But if 6 years later you ended up with skin cancer, I'm using a silly example, but it's something that's fairly graphic, you probably wouldn't make the correlation, even though that could be the case. And I wonder if that's part of the problem, that we perceive that these chemicals, so we perceive that the carpet fibers and the synthetic fibers, that the toxins going into the grooming products, that the chemicals going into the stable cleaning process, there doesn't appear to be an immediate or connected damage. And so that immediate cause and effect is completely hijacked by what you were talking about earlier, which is availability, cost, and well marketed products. And so maybe in order to support consumer knowledge and change behaviors, we need to do a better job of demonstrating cause and effect.
Yeah, and I think people need to listen to their gut, listen to their common sense, because I just want to go back to a chemical that Ben was mentioning before, permethrin and the Cortonian ammonium compounds. Names are just nuts.
Maybe we
Can't,
should start by changing the names of all
let's
these
do
things, because
Yeah,
that.
if you
exactly.
can't remember it, then you're probably
No.
not gonna.
No, I mean I can't say half of them. Anyway, let's just take a case study. So those ingredients are used in fly spray. We know instinctively there's a couple of brands that I'm thinking of in particular. When you spray it, there's a couple of girls in my yard that use this stuff. It chokes me. I cannot physically
Yeah,
breathe. And then I look at them, they spray it onto a sponge to wipe it on the horse's face because the horse is terrified of sprays or whatever, and it melts the sponge. Now, if that's not screaming, we shouldn't be using this, I don't know what is.
yeah.
But there just seems to be this complete disconnect, doesn't there? And I think,
Totally, and it's clever marketing as well.
yeah,
You know
it
that
is.
there's a brand called it just does my nut. There's a brand called Zoflora. You'll be familiar with it, right? And it
Yeah.
looks all very innocent. It's got flowers on the front of it. Smells like fruits of the forest and all the rest of it. It's it's no better than anything than you look on it. That is coordinammonium compound, cyclopentasiloxane, which is banned post Brexit, by the way. And it is just so there's no oversight. It's clever marketing, and in the case of horses, stick a picture of a horse on it, and people, and it's sold. It's sold via farm and stable where you get everything else. Oh, I'm going to buy a bucket and a sponge. Oh, you go on the website and there happens to be some equine disinfectant there. So you just click that, no questions asked. Guy
Mm.
from DHL delivers it, and off you go.
No
You turn
shame
it
on the
It's
over.
guy
There's
from DHL here. He doesn't
there's
know what he's delivering.
picture.
it's a really
There's
difficult
a
one
wilted
as a
tree and
horse
upside down
owner.
fish.
Because thinking back to the welfare point, we want to do the best by our horses.
Yeah.
So if my horse is standing in a field and it's covered in flies, I want to do something to help. And if I marketed a product that's telling me that it will ward off, repel flies, I'm going to buy it because I want to make my horse's life more comfortable. So I think there's that issue there as well, because those ingredients unfortunately do work at repelling flies. It's
Yeah.
just that it comes at a cost, and actually the brands haven't maybe spent the money on looking at ingredients that can still do that job, but maybe a bit more expensive and they need to reformulate their products, and that comes at a cost.
Well, let's go straight to that then, because I always like to do a bit of myth busting. Maybe they're not myths, who knows? But I definitely feel, and Alex, I noticed earlier in the conversation you mentioned that you were perceived as being a bit woo-woo in the early
Yeah.
days, which I guess in UK parlance is sort of a bit hippie-ish, a bit, a bit out there. Um, and I do think we're still in a time where natural products or herbal remedies, or that kind of vernacular, which is essentially what we're talking about here, is perceived as being a bit woo-woo in Alex's words. So are they as effective as synthetic or toxic alternatives that, let's be honest, if I want to clean my sink, I know if I put bleach down it's going to come up nice and shiny. So is it truly possible to get rid of the toxins from our world, our horse's world, and still have the same results?
I
I
think
can, sorry, Alex, you go.
so. I think historically that's more accurate, but science and research has come so far that, you know, nowadays, and I'm saying nowadays, like the last, 5 years, if you were to look at this 20 years ago, I think it really would have been a performance problem because I think there wasn't the technology to look into the natural remedies in order to be able to have them perform the same or if not better. And so I think there's companies like Zoe and Ben that have put in the money, but not because they had to, but because they wanted to find those alternatives that work better. And I don't think 20 years ago you would have had that, but I think nowadays you're finding that the perception is still back that they don't work the same, but the technology has become so much more advanced and more research has been done on natural remedies that I think are the same or more effective.
And
Yeah,
to
it's
stay
it's
with you for a moment, Alex, so I just need to pick this point up because I know that your surface
Mhm.
is actually aimed at the performance end of the market. We're not talking about selling your surface to, uh, I don't know how to phrase it nicely, but to someone that might want a natural commune-esque lifestyle. I mean, you're
No,
selling into the top
yeah.
polo players, top show jumpers.
When we developed it, our goal was our only source of feedback was only, Olympic athletes. Our so we needed it to perform in order for those disciplines to be successful. And so that was our criteria. So we developed for performance.
Hmm.
And or else no one's going to use it. No one's
Hmm.
going to use a product that doesn't work, whether that's synthetic or natural. And
mm,
so it doesn't matter if it's super environmentally friendly or if it's the better option. If it doesn't work, people aren't going to use it. And so it has to perform the same or better in order for it to be a successful switch.
Yeah.
And technology didn't used to exist, and we've come so far, I think.
Ben, sorry, I interrupted you.
yeah, I think that is spot on. The technology thing, it's an interesting one in my case because so I'll give you two things that are used around horses all the time. Honey,
Mhm.
people use honey as a natural antimicrobial agent, and silver. And silver was used in the Napoleonic era for they dropped a silver coin in milk to stop it turning sour. It has antimicrobial properties. So our product is a silver stabilized hydrogen peroxide. Guess why honey is used as an antimicrobial agent? Because the byproduct when it breaks down is hydrogen peroxide, H2O2. When hydrogen peroxide breaks down, it's water and oxygen, nothing else. Problem with that is it's unstable. And also, if you got tons and tons of Manuka honey to wipe on your horse, it would cost a fortune.
Hmm.
So to Alex's point, I mean, we're combining hydrogen peroxide and silver together. That's only possible through advancements of technology.
Interesting. Okay, so natural solutions now are as effective, if not better, than synthetic, but are they always more expensive?
So from our perspective,
Right. So
yeah, I was going to say, from our perspective, we've tried to price ourselves so that we're affordable for the majority of the market. But that means that our margins are not as high. So
Yeah.
I'm not,
yeah,
I'm not super rich yet, which is a real shame.
It's a terrible shame.
We've taken a huge margin hit in order to be competitive with synthetic. It's an
Mm.
expensive material to make. We have over 15 ingredients that go into our natural fiber in order to take different performance qualities from different types of fibers and able to put them together so they perform, equally well. Um, with that comes a huge manufacturing cost and labor cost and materials cost that you don't get from a synthetic alternative. And so we've taken the profit to a very different level than I think if you were to use a synthetic material. And a lot of companies won't do that. A lot of companies don't make that decision because they would prefer to keep their profit margins. And so I think we are very competitive price wise, but there's still room to grow on being able to get a better price out there.
that's really interesting. So exactly, it's all three of us.
Mhm.
Yeah, have a synergy there. Probably because we're trying to get market share in new businesses. So, I price my product the same as my competitors. So
Mhm.
until we get to a point, well, we're already there, but I still haven't adjusted the price. I'm too
Yeah.
nervous to do so.
Yeah.
But I know it's better. I can prove it's better. You
Mhm.
can use less of it. So by definition, we're offering the end user a discount
Yep.
because but to get market share as a new business, you have to be competitive.
It's exactly our point.
So this
Mhm.
is a really thorny part of sustainability then, isn't it? That I feel that for the last 47 minutes, you have incredibly eloquently described some of the truly horrifying impacts of toxins on certainly on horse and rider. And for my part, we could talk for hours on the environmental impacts. The fact that the UK is suffering as one of the worst countries in the world for biodiversity, and a significant proportion of that is to do with pollution. And that pollution comes from a variety of sources. But ultimately, it's a number of different avenues all coming together. And it's part of a mentality and a mindset that allows and accepts toxins and pollution to be part of normal life. And that's something we have lived with for decades, really. And this is absolutely fundamental for the poor health, particularly of our waterways in this country. I mean, they really are, they're the worst in Europe. It's lovely for Alex to say that Europe leads the way in many ways, but we are trailing behind Europe from
I've
our
learned a lot about your water. It's
yeah.
not.
Yeah. Yes, in one of our Ben and Zoe, in one of our preparation calls, my colleague Zoe and I told Alex about the sewage difficulties, and Alex was absolutely flabbergasted to hear that we have that in the UK.
Awful.
But that's where we are, and it's somewhat normalized. Pollution feels like an acceptable, normal part of daily life, and a, an acceptable consequence to having a less expensive product. And I didn't actually know that was the answer that you were going to give me, that each of you have found it to be more expensive. I suppose myth busting, there was a part of me that hoped you'd say, no, my product's cheaper. But therein lies the reality of where we're at. If you want something that's not going to cause damage, that is going to work, then we can't want everything cheap.
So,
Yeah.
and I don't know how it is in the UK, but petrochemicals are incredibly subsidized in America,
Yeah.
which is why the synthetic options are so cheap. If you were to put the accurate representation of how much a synthetic material costs, natural would be cheaper. And so the I think we've been initially brought this up was having a regulatory aspect to this is a really key fundamental change that's going to really help bring in and help bridge the gap a little bit, I think, in the pricing.
And it's about scale as well, isn't it?
Yes,
Because
usually.
the more of us that adopt these ingredients and the more of us that adopt these materials, the price is going to come down. but we're not there yet.
That's a great segue to
Yeah.
my final question in the last 10 minutes, which is, shockingly, this may be news to you all, but it's 2025 and we are still more than ever talking about toxins and environmental damage and chronic healthcare problems and welfare difficulties for a horse. So White Griffin is all about transitioning to a sustainable future. So, in this particular domain, you guys are the leaders and innovators in this field. How do we get from where we are now to where we need to be? And, you know, maybe there are policymakers listening in on this call, but there's definitely equestrians that will be watching this. What can they do? How do we avoid toxins in our horse's life and transition to a sustainable toxin-free future? I'll start with Ben because you're pursed and ready to go.
Mm. Well, there's interesting juxtaposition here. I mean, it has to come from top down. People that are trusted. Trust is everything. But there's a strange dynamic going on. So we talked about vets. People trust their vets. Vets are now, a lot of vets have been taken over by big VC companies. So a lot of vets have sold out to big firms. These big firms are going, oh, we need a sustainability regime. So they push their vets in sustainability, but then when their vets make the choice around that sustainability, the companies, the VC companies, say no, the commercials don't work. So it has to come. It's very difficult. So the dynamics change, but in answer to your question, I think it's trust, top down, institutionally driven, and educationally driven.
Zoe?
And visibility. I mean, I think horse owners are loyal, but actually we need the vets, we need the farriers, we need the equestrian media, we need influencers to lend their voices and say that these ingredients matter, this topic matters. I think the more education that we have at grassroots level, for example, for us, for our brand ambassador programs, rider to rider conversations, it will help spread awareness. And if we can prove that these products work, they're as effective as the non-natural synthetic toxic versions, then that's when we can start to really get things moving. And at the same time, regulation does need to catch up. We need to think about what's going on in human skincare and cosmetics and work out a way to translate that into the horse care world.
Alex?
It's interesting because a lot of our growth has been customer demand, which has been so the regulatory side and the installer side won't make a change unless that we have found in surfaces that unless the consumer demands that that's what they want. And so a lot of our growth recently has been very customer driven because the FEI, the USEF, the other federations aren't taking a position on what a surface should be in terms of performance. And that's a very subjective conversation. So it's hard for them to say, this is the optimum service, this is what you should be doing. And, that's what needs to be done in the market. So a lot of our growth has been customer driven, which is lovely to see because it's bringing more awareness to the customer. But again, there needs, in order for a mass adoption of this material everywhere, there does need to be a more pressurized top-down approach to make it more available, to make it more seen, better education, known that I'd love to see the IOC be a little bit stricter on the federations because I think that kind of makes them then have to push more of their regulatory aspect of it. So I think there's a lot of different agents that have a lot of say and a lot of reach that I think need to make a little bit more of a stand than what they've done.
And I suppose all of that comes down to if you're saying actually it's a top-down approach because there is good consumer desire, do we think that the decision makers have enough knowledge and understanding of these really horrifying facts as you're presenting them with particular with regard to welfare, clearly we would present them from an environmental perspective, but you've got two incredibly strong pillars there of welfare and the environment sitting absolutely cheek by jowl saying we cannot continue using these products. This is a really critical health situation for all animals, horse or wild. So do you think that there is enough, or could the likes of us do more to support the knowledge of those decision makers at the top and, get a
I
natural
think
fibre into LA in 28?
I think there's probably a lot more synergy needs to be met between. Alex mentioned it yesterday. In If you take racing, which is one area of equestrianism, and take dressage as another, or show jump, they all operate quite differently.
Hmm.
So they should communicate better with them. The British Horse Racing Association, BHA, are very hot on certain things, but British show jumping might not be. So they all should, it's too segregated. So
Or maybe it's
equestrianism as a
about,
whole.
picking one of those and going, British dressage, you take this on and show the rest of the equestrian world how it can be done.
Mm.
Almost like take it, or the Racehorse Association or whatever it's called, they do the same, and that's where the money is. So maybe they would be a good shout, but
I
one
also
person can take it on, and
I also think it's wellness is a scary topic. I
Mm.
think you can get skewered in the media. Your whole business can be destroyed if, or we've seen people get canceled. I mean, wellness is a very scary topic when it comes to equestrianism. And so I think being able to share and show those organizations that there is a better way to communicate wellness than the you are hurting your horse,
Yeah.
that I think the message could be better in order to have real change.
Well, I'm finishing this conversation with strange optimism that, it's not often that we have a problem with a solution already there. And ultimately, the three of you represent three of, I think, several toxic-free solutions that are out there. The problem is in the storytelling, in the governance, and in the knowledge and understanding, listening to what you're all saying. And that's all stuff that can be done. We can spread the word, we can create more understanding. Oftentimes, the problem is that there is no solution. So I feel heartened to know that there are the three of you out there, and I hope a much broader community, so that those watching the webinar at a grassroots level, people can go out and make the right choices by buying your products and other similar ones that reject toxins. And for the rest of the likes of us and everyone who's working more in the back engine, there's clearly work to be done within the various corporate and governance spheres to really hammer home the message that there's no place for toxins in our horse rider or environment. So with that, I'd like to thank you all. I have learned a great deal in the hour that we spent together. So thank you, Alex Carr from Noviun, Zoe Kiff from Honest Riders, and Ben Tuckey from BioGenie. The next webinar coming up soon will be advertised via our social media channels. So please do check in and learn more. And this webinar will be available on the White Griffin website and via our social media channels. I wish you a totally toxic-free remainder of the day, and thank you so much for listening.